The risk is that we as humans are incredibly emotionally susceptible to believing that they're human. I actually think maybe the landscape is going to look more like the fashion landscape. And I think that AI is sort of creating the fast fashion equivalent, like fast fashion content. It's plentiful, it's cheap, it's everywhere. However, there's increasing segments of consumers that are starting to want clothes that are organic, that are ethically made, that are sustainable.
It calls on us to be more conscious about what we pay attention to. It's called pay attention because it's a currency. And so how we use that is also an opportunity.
I also know that technology is a mirror, so it is always going to be the best of us and the worst of us at the same time. We cannot separate the two, just like we can't separate them within ourselves.
Welcome to Life with Machines, a show about living and thriving in the post-AI world. Big shout out to our sponsors at Lenovo for their support. I'm your host, Baratunde Thurston, and this is a bonus episode. We've all been hearing news headlines that AI promises to revolutionize everything. Healthcare, travel, entertainment, education. The thing is, sometimes those promises sound a bit like threats. And are these promises things that we're really even asking for? If you know me, you know I love tech. And I think AI's potential benefits are undeniable. Groundbreaking medical advancements, frictionless industries, safer travel, unimagined creative vistas. But beneath AI's rapid growth is an understory of social, economic, and political uncertainty. Here to help us think through some of these choices is the renowned digital anthropologist and best-selling author, Rahaf Harfoush. Her latest book is Hustle and Float. Reclaim your creativity and thrive in a world obsessed with work. Yes, she is hella impressive. Let's kick it with Rahaf. Rahaf, friend, homie, AI expert. Welcome to Life with Machines.
So good to be able to hang out with you. I can't believe we get to do this for work. It's amazing.
Yes, we get to play at work, so we're kind of winning the thing. I know where you are. I think I know where you are, but our viewers, listeners, absorbers of content, they don't know. So can you just geospatially situate yourself for us?
Sure. I am in the southeast of France. I have a farm called Happy Fox Farm, and it is in the Beaujolais wine region. And I spend my summers and a lot of time up here. So I'm in my little recording office / writing nook, little cave where I spend most of my time.
That sounds delicious, and I'm going to try not to be too jealous. Congratulations on your life, Rahaf. What is a digital anthropologist? I know this is what your title for yourself is, but could you break down what that actually means?
Sure. A digital anthropologist studies the impact of technology and culture and how these two things intersect with each other because they impact each other back and forth. So on one hand, our culture, which is our behaviors, our rituals, our beliefs, our norms, they dictate the types of technological tools that we create, from our phones to apps to digital platforms. But by the same token, those digital platforms then in and of themselves create new behaviors, new norms, new belief systems that then impact the outside culture. So for example, how Tinder has changed the dating game and how it has impacted the way people think about like monogamy. So digital anthropology looks at the human impact in this like intersectional interrelationship between tech and culture.
That's great. And that's a big part of why you're here. The show is called Life with Machines, and we're really focused on the life part, not just the technology and just the machines. How did you get so interested in this that it's like your label on LinkedIn?
Well, the real answer, and I'll be honest with you because you know me, is that I am very nosy as a person. I'm very curious. And the internet from the early days allowed us lurkers, to just get a glimpse into people's lives that at the time when, Reddit just started and blogs just started, you couldn't get. It was like you were driving down the street and you know how sometimes you like peek into people's windows as you're walking by, you're like, oh, that person has a really beautiful chandelier, or that person has a wall-to-wall bookshelf. So you're seeing these glimpses into people's lives. But then the internet was like inviting us into their private lives. All of a sudden, we were hearing about people's work and their struggles and their relationship problems and their creative endeavors. And I found that so fascinating that I ended up really wanting to pursue understanding how people were showing up in this new digital medium. You know, I was in university when Facebook first came out, and I remember so clearly the first friend request from somebody that I hadn't spoken to since third grade. And I just thought, oh, this is going to be so fascinating. And so that's the road. I love people. I love stories. I love lives. I love to see what people are excited about. I always say I'm like a fan of fans, you know, and the internet is just endless communities of people talking about what they love, about what they hate, and just sharing our humanity.
So that Facebook example, it takes me back to this earlier internet moment. Tell me more about that friend request and that friend and how that further sparked not just your own individual relationship with them or not, but the idea that you wanted to more formally look at these kind of social anthropological dynamics.
I mean, I remember it so clearly because we take it for granted so much now. Now you meet someone at a conference and 5 years later, you're still connected on LinkedIn. And so it's so normalized now that we have these links to each other. So as time went on, I started realizing that there were both positives and negatives, because what we were doing, and I started to write about this very, very early on. What we were doing was we were messing with what I used to call at the time, like the natural decay of relationships, right? Like all relationships have, some of them were not meant to last forever. And so what does it mean within the context of our relationships where all of a sudden you could stay in touch with everybody forever all the time? And that really I started getting interested in anthropology and Dunbar's number. I started getting interested in psychology and human relationships. And I just found technology to be so interesting. But I remember so clearly those moments. I remember hitting publish on my first WordPress blog. I remember having somebody that I didn't know in Toronto tell me that they read that blog. And so it felt like it expanded the world in a way that was really wonderful. And this was all at the time when it was brand new and we didn't get into all of the dark, horrible things that would end up traumatizing us later on. So.
Yay for later trauma. So I want to bring you into my conversation with Dr. Alondra Nelson. And I'm curious if there was a specific moment from that conversation that stood out to you as unexpected or particularly thought-provoking.
To be honest, the entire conversation was a delight. I just love listening to her talk. I think she is brilliant. And so it is always such a gift, again, a gift of technology that we have access to people who are very generous with their information and with their insights. I found myself thinking, though, I wonder if maybe America has this innate optimism inside their tech policy, because when she was talking about all of the tools and technologies and, you know, making sure we're protecting people, I kept thinking like these technologies are going to be great under the right administration. And I experienced something sort of similar in my thoughts in France, because for the Olympic Games in France had to change some of their privacy laws to allow massive AI-powered surveillance for security purposes, all to keep us and the millions of people who visited the city during the Olympics to keep us safe. And I just kept thinking to myself, okay, well, sure, it's going to be used to keep us safe by this administration, but we very recently missed an incredibly close call where we just avoided having an extreme right-wing party win and get elected. Thankfully, they didn't get elected. And then I just thought, okay, so all of this AI-powered surveillance, what are they going to do with it? What's that party going to do with it? Because one of the things she said that I do agree with is we don't have to rewrite the social contract every time a new technology emerges. But that kind of assumes that everybody understands what the social contract is and everybody agrees about what it is that we owe each other. And if you look at the development of social services, say, I'm going to say France, even like maybe Europe more broadly versus say the US, you would see that each country has a social contract, but those social contracts are quite different in terms of how we think about things like access to healthcare, subsidized education, social services, unemployment, the security net, the social safety net that I think is such a big part of being French, of being European. That doesn't really exist in that capacity in the US. And I think that if you grow up in one culture, you might not necessarily know the differences or the blind spots. The social contract that is very American focused, even though we have a lot of overlaps between Europe, both being sort of these westernized countries, that there are some significant differences that can play a big impact in terms of people's purpose and what happens to their job security and what happens to their privacy. I mean, as Alondra mentioned, the EU AI Act is probably one of like the strongest pieces of legislation. And some would say from America, I've heard entrepreneurs say, oh, well, that's going to stifle innovation. But that's because fundamentally, the definition of innovation that American entrepreneurs, North American, I'll say entrepreneurs use is one that is dependent on a very specific type of capitalism that requires a specific type of, I'm not going to say exploitation, but I'm going to say a specific type.
But you just said the word. I literally heard you say I'm not going to say exploitation.
I'm going to say a specific access to readily available resources that might not be able to function as well in different economic contexts.
So I want to pluck at that string there. I just forced a music metaphor.
Ding.
Because you're on the ground in the technological digital ecosystem of France specifically and the EU more broadly, are you seeing any negative impact, any like hands tied in terms of the innovation possible because of the deeper commitment, one might say, to certain human rights and rights in general, or the more restrictive is another way to put it, bounds around how AI is used, right? Is the North American complaint valid from what you're able to see? You've lived in both geographic contexts.
I mean, sure. I've definitely heard entrepreneurs complain in Europe about GDPR, for example, the legislation that protects our data processing and like our data as citizens. However, if you look at all the cases where where people are not protected by GDPR, that's where things lead to events like Cambridge Analytica scandal. It leads to, for example, it leads to instances where the data that is being used to make company money at the expense of our privacy, our behavior, information that we might not want to have shared with the world. And what I like about Europe is GDPR is not perfect, but it is a level of protection that I definitely appreciate. And what I always tell people who complain about GDPR, because, the rollout and the user experience isn't great.
That's a lot of clicking. Yeah.
Instead of like, yeah-ing the yes, accept, to look at the information, like to click show me more. The last time I did this on a website, it was a news website, and I always click because I'm nosy and I want to know. I want to know what's going on. And so I clicked on show me more, and it was something like, this website is going to share your data with these 2,317 providers. And you go through the list, and it's like, this one's taking your device information, and this one's taking your IP address, and this one's taking your usage of where you're clicking, and this one's taking your information, your location, and this one's taking your search history. And you think to yourself, okay, I used to think, I'm letting this website access my information.
No, it's the website and all its friends. Yeah.
So for me, I think the bigger question, and this is like a much more sort of like controversial question, is what is the real definition of innovation that we should be pushing, and who gets to benefit from that type of innovation? Because I think, of course, if I was an entrepreneur that just wanted to make a lot of money, it's probably a lot easier to do that if I didn't have to worry about protecting people's data and not manipulating people and having to disclose the data and having to do all of those things. But is that type of innovation, is that aligned with the values of the type of world that we want to live in?
It reminds me of this other moment, which you just said with Alondra, that she shared a phrase you heard from a friend, there's no Steph Curry without the 3-point line.
I love that.
And the idea, I think the simplistic idea that we have in North America, I just want a good French baguette. Just listening to you just makes me want that like local wine for so much less than it costs to import it. But the idea that we in America could only innovate without restriction, it's actually harder to innovate with the restriction and thus potentially higher value, right? It's like it's more amazing to shoot from that 3-point line than to just stand under the basket and dunk it constantly because you have easy access to the basket. And so your challenge and the way you've articulated the challenge of what even is innovation, is it just gimme everything and make it easy for me? Or is the act of innovating in response to some constraint, some restriction?
I mean, I just want to also push back because I think it's also interesting that people think restrictions to innovation is just like taking something away or is like, preventing them. But for example, if you were just to say that all technological innovation moving forward have to be sustainable on a climate level from the base, from the get-go, is that something that's so horrible? We're now literally living through one of the impacts of of AI, the AI revolution, which is the amount of power and data that it actually takes, the electricity, the climate impact that it's having. So if you were to say from the beginning, everything we do, we're not going to tell you how, it just has to be sustainable. It has to be transparent. It has to be equitable. It has to be, ethical. Then it forces us to be thoughtful from the beginning, because I really don't like the pattern that we've had over the last 10 years, which is like, oops, we broke democracy. It's like, no, like that is not acceptable anymore when the oops is an interconnected global system where people are literally rewriting the rules of power and consent and politics and our lives. So it's not okay for me. It's not just like a couple of kids in the garage that are failing fast and break, or what is it, like fail fast and break often or whatever. Like that's no longer the case when we're talking about democracy. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just think that if you are going to have the technology to build these amazing tools and you're going to try to sell me on a vision of how much it's going to improve everyone's lives, you have to have the accountability to put your algorithm where your mouth is and prove it. Because right now it's just a lot of talk, and it's infuriating because it's having real world consequences, as Alondra mentioned, particularly around minorities, POC communities that often suffer disproportionately at the mistakes and misalignments that emerge from these types of tech.
So you just got so animated and so far, I could feel it. You use the word infuriated. Where is the anger coming from?
The anger comes from having a very disproportionately small group of people that were not democratically elected, that are having an outsized influence on our daily lives in almost every single capacity. The friends we're connected to, the news that we're watching, the platforms that have the most power, and they are funneling hundreds of millions of dollars to impact policy to benefit themselves. At the same time, they are selling us this vision of this tech utopia, telling us that everything is going to be amazing, the technology is going to save us, that this future state is going to one day arrive. And it's infuriating because by continuously focusing on the future, they're deliberately refusing to address the real world harm that same technology is causing now in the present. So don't talk to me about how there's going to be an abundance of work and everyone's going to be great, when right now disinformation and misinformation are completely messing with children's minds. They're messing with elections. We've got like all of these hallucinations. We've got all of these privacy concerns. And I'm a tech lover. I love technology, but me loving technology and loving something means you have to look at it honestly. So I do get just a bit touchy about that.
I love it. At Life with Machines, we believe technology should benefit us. And so does our sponsor, Lenovo. Lenovo's Smarter AI is your AI. Personalized and easy to scale, Smarter AI delivers outcomes that matter most to you and your business. With full stack AI hardware, software, and service solutions, Lenovo's bringing the transformative power of AI to industries, organizations, and people of every kind. Our small but mighty team is a great example. Lenovo has our back. Devices for every step of the way? Check. Unparalleled services that seamlessly integrate with said devices? Check. Lenovo isn't just a hardware company, but a full suite of solutions that help you run efficiently. Visit lenovo.com/smarterAI to discover how Lenovo is using AI for good to power people forward. Do you, I'm unsurprisingly aligned with this. We share a lot of these values and some of this pissed off / hopeful perspective. And it is that deep love. It's a form of patriotism to honestly know the country you claim to be patriotic about. And it's a form of love to want the best from, and to make better the thing or the relationship in which you find yourself in love. Is there a particular, so you've named a utopian vision that I think you feel a challenge about. You've named present harms, and you've, election misinformation, manipulation and misinformation of kids as like two particular examples. But to rewind on the vision part, do you buy into what you hear of the vision, right? From the smallish group of people where they're trying to take us. Does that feel good to you? Or do you have a fundamental disagreement on the goal as you understand it? Even what do you understand it to be? And do you agree with it?
I think the goal in and of itself is a good one, to use technology to make people's lives better. And there are things that are incredibly exciting. There were studies recently that showed that AI could accurately help predict rates of breast cancer almost 4 years before they would show up on a scan. There are mapping of proteins that are going to completely accelerate the development of treatments for diseases. There are all sorts of fascinating tools that I think could improve the quality of life of so many people around the world that I'm very excited about. I've been trying to remind myself, and I've just been reminding myself solar punk, every time people are dystopian future, I'm like, no, solar punk. What would that look like for us in AI? Technology that works with nature, technology that empowers people to learn in ways that make sense to them, technology that strengthens connections, technology that makes education affordable, healthcare accessible, all of that is right there. My concern is that from an ideological process, and this is something that I've been researching recently, that the people that are currently developing these technologies have a very specific idea of what they believe their role should be in this new world. And it is not one that maybe is represented by the current democratic process we have in place today. So I get very nervous when a small group of people start to have this disproportionate control. What I am excited about is I'm excited that AI is allowing researchers to work with each other and to crunch big numbers of data in ways that wasn't possible. I'm excited about open source. I'm excited about the digital commons. I'm excited about humanity sort of coming together and being able to pool our resources. At the same time, it's really like this dualist. It isn't one or the other. It's both at the same, it's like both. And so the more I read about the belief systems of what some of these big tech founders can believe, written in their own words, read their blog posts and their views and their letters to their investors. And again, one of the benefits of the internet age that we have is a lot of this information is so readily available.
You can peek into the living room or the boardroom. Yeah.
Yeah. You could listen to Elon Musk talk about his worldview for hours. But if you keep listening to his worldview, you understand that he has a very particular economic output that was brilliantly covered by Jill Lepore in her podcast, The Evening Rocket. So my big thing for people listening, Life with Machine listeners, is to ask yourself, what do the people who are building these tools, what do they really believe? What is Sam Altman's vision of the future? You should go. He talks a lot about it. So you don't need to guess. You just have to go read it and then say, do I agree with that or not? And if you do, awesome. But if not, then where are there mechanisms in our democratic process? We're supposed to be able to vote. If we don't agree with something, we're supposed to be able to go out and be able to vote. If it's a mechanism where there's no voting, but there's billions of dollars to build these far-reaching systems, then what do?
We go get our own billions of dollars and vote with those, like a healthy
and
democracy.
We eventually become the villains, and it just all
Absolutely. Somebody's got to win. Can you touch on the Elon example? Is probably very revealing, and it is good to get behind the curtain of where these particular leaders are anchored in terms of their future vision. How would you articulate what you've learned from listening with this particular set of attention to Elon's vision of the future? How would you break that down for us?
So Jill Lepore calls Elon's view, and to be fair, a lot of this podcast was recorded before he took over Twitter and seemed to completely change into a different person. But originally, she described his economic worldview as a hyper-capitalist. So that means he believes in very little regulation. That's just an interesting note. So because he believes in little regulation, it explains why when he went into Twitter, he disbanded the safety teams and the oversight teams because he believes it'll regulate itself. That I'm not saying that's right or that's wrong. That is his belief. We also know from different interviews that he, in some sense, is an effective altruist or a long-termist. If you understand his long-termism views, then you understand why he's so interested, supposedly, by colonizing Mars, because long-termists believe that it doesn't really matter what happens to the bulk of civilization as long as some part of our species survives, that the ultimate survival of our species is the most important thing. So to colonize Mars is a safe bet in the future, but by definition, that means that as a priority, things like poverty and climate change and, geopolitical uprisings, none of those things are worth putting money towards, because ultimately, even if 80% of the human population gets destroyed in one of these events, we should be focusing on the infrastructure of who's going to survive. And what is underpinned in that ideology is that he believes that we need to prioritize the people who could continue to develop the technology that are going to save us. So the people on the first shuttles to Mars are not going to necessarily be the everyman. And so, again, I think it's really fascinating. Journalist Emil Torres has done a remarkable, Dr. Emil Torres, brand new Dr. Emil Torres, they have recently done a wide, far-reaching range of articles that dig in specifically to long-termism as one of the most misunderstood, hidden, but quite concerning ideologies in technology. So then that's what I like. I like kind of putting it together, because then you're like, okay, now I don't agree with it, but at least I can kind of understand what's happening.
And that brings us back to a deep theme, I think, in both of our lives and work, and certainly a project that I've been running for a few years, this How to Citizen, right? You raised such a provocative and clear challenge. If we're directed in small d democratic systems to exert our power, to wield it through voting, and yet there is a center of power, influencing all of us outside of our ability to vote for or against it, what do we do? And so we have this set of principles about, okay, well, we can, collectively prioritize our well-being, not just individually. We can show up and participate in ways that go beyond voting. We can value and invest in our relationships so we can understand different ways to wield that power. I'm curious, have you seen other effective ways, given the actual dynamic we're living in right now, outside of the voting, that show, okay, we can wield this power, we can vote for or advocate for or make more real the future that we want, and not just receive it from a few tech priests on high?
Yeah, and I actually think this goes back to our original love of technology. This is where I think technology plays such an amazing role, because one of the things that we were sold with the dream of the internet was this decentralized approach. we have the ability to organize, to connect with each other on a level and scale that wasn't really available before. So we're seeing people direct, protests. We're seeing them direct campaigns. We're seeing them raise funds for themselves. I'm seeing people starting to create mutual aid networks. I'm seeing people teaching each other, because education is a part. I mean, for me, my biggest learning from an activism perspective, as I started seeing more activism just happen over the last couple of months and more people becoming sort of aware of the larger scale systems of oppression that exist around us, and really just understanding how interconnected our humanity is, has been like, I used to think, oh, well, I guess all I can do is protest and vote. But in actuality, there's an entire spectrum of things that we can do in building community and educating each other and creating art, in sharing resources.
Yeah.
But I also know that technology is a mirror. So it is always going to be the best of us and the worst of us at the same time. We cannot separate the two, just like we can't separate them within ourselves.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for ISO 27001, SOC 2, GDPR, and leading AI frameworks like ISO 42001 and NIST AI Risk Management Framework, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 9,000 global companies like LangChain, Leela AI, and Factory AI use Vanta to demonstrate AI trust and prove security in real time. For a limited time, get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/machines. You said something else that I find really beautiful. And that is how we, when you talked about resource sharing and mutual aid, I was reminded of the mycelial networks, right, of like mushrooms and fungi, and the forest beneath the forest, and how these trees kind of help each other out, and the biomimicry of that. And so much of what we're inventing and innovating on is like remembering this other technological force that has powered us since time immemorial, and instead of a literal sense, and reconnecting with nature. And you use the term solar punk as a part of your vision of the future. Not everyone watching and listening really knows what that means. You imply that it is about technology in the deeper alignment with the natural world, but could you just give your definition more briefly of what solar punk is and where that comes from?
Yeah, so it's sort of, when you talk about science fiction, when you talk about imagining the future, there's often two, and this is like very broad, I'm sure there's more, but in general, there's sort of two buckets of visions. You have the dystopian vision, which is sort of like Blade Runner, it's like the darkest elements of it.
Literally
technology
dark.
Is our technological overlords. It's Black Mirror to the nth degree. I think we're all familiar with that. But then often there's sometimes another one. It's, I guess maybe instead of solar punk, another close a close example would be like what people would call the Star Trek future, right? Where technology is being harnessed for the greatest good of humanity, where technology works in harmony with nature. And when you look at the aesthetics of solar punk, it's often like high tech, but it's high tech that's surrounded by trees and rivers. There's a huge element of nature and technology integrating in a way where nature isn't, in a way where the technology isn't dominating, but where the two have managed to find this harmony. And I was recently reminded that if we can picture dysfunctional dystopia, we have the capacity to equally picture solar punk, and that we cannot let ourselves fall into a crisis of imagination where we let ourselves be dragged into this dystopian timeline only because we didn't say, wait a minute, there's actually a million other ways that we can do this. There's actually a million ways that we can help each other. And I loved your example about the mycelium and the networks. One thing that I saw recently, again on TikTok, that was particularly interesting was people were creating what was called help chains, flower chains. And what they were doing was they were creating playlists, and it was people who had medical debt, financial debt, pet debt or just like regular, they were just like in debt, really struggling to make ends meet. And the gist of it, so creative, so human, was if you don't have the money to help donate to these causes, we know these algorithms monetize our attention. So if we all created our own network and we all watched each other's videos hundreds of thousands of times, then the algorithm itself through the TikTok creator portal can actually end up paying off our debts. And we agree that we're going to commit our attention. So people were going through these playlists of hundreds of videos, and I'm watching this guy, he needs $10,000 for his dog surgery. And this one has a poor kid who's sick, and this one's going to lose the house. And we're just watching these videos. And sometimes they don't even do anything. Sometimes they're just like, please help me. And yet all of us collectively innovating to turn the algorithm that's trying to profit off of our attention into a force of good. And that is the human spirit. That is what we can do. That is the potential that I think we need to keep striving for.
Yes, 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 yes. I so love that. And that is also a very like energetic reversal. It has Tai Chi, Aikido,
yes, that's what I'm
kind
saying.
of vibes, you know? And so we don't just have to be victims of this system. We can redirect that flow. And attention as a form of power is often really underrated and under-acknowledged. And we think of power in this like physical sense and in this financial sense. But what we give our attention to, we give our power to. So it calls on us to be more conscious about what we pay attention to. It's called pay attention because it's a currency. And so how we use that is also an opportunity. I did not know about that flower chain example. Thank you so much. That's given me a little more hope and a little more life for our life with machines. Ding! And I put a little sparkle in post, a little sparkle on my tooth.
Perfect.
Right there.
Perfection.
Oh, man. So we're fast running out of time. I could spend so much more time with you. I want to, we don't have an opportunity right now. We'll figure it out technically in the future for you to interact with our custom AI, Blair. That's just challenging in a remote sense. Blair's on a laptop just off screen here, but you heard some of me and Alondra interacting with Blair. And I have two questions for you. One is a general, how did it strike you? You know, what did it bring up for you as a digital anthropologist, as a human person, a human being? And then the other is a particular question around the pronouns, because Alondra had a really instant reaction.
Yes, I saw. That clicked to, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So start with a pronoun for you. Now, how did you feel about that moment, and what is your own thought about it? And then zoom out with us on your take on this experiment we're running with Blair and how it resonated with you or didn't.
I loved it. I thought it was interesting that you chose a female sounding voice. I don't know why I thought you would or wouldn't. I just, when I was going to say when she started talking, when it started talking, don't get mad at me, Alondra. When it started talking, I was like, oh, she was speaking quite smoothly, which I really appreciated. I'm not particularly concerned with the pronoun thing as much because, as Alondra mentioned with the pet rock example, our species literally cannot help but assign emotions to everything. So am I a little bit concerned about what the etiquette should be? Yes, I think we need to think through that. There is, I don't know if you've ever seen The Good Place. Have you ever seen The Good Place, the show?
I have been told to, and I had initiated it. But that's a long way of saying, no, I have not really watched The Good Place.
There's one scene, there's no spoilers, but there's one scene where the AI in that show is a woman named Janet, and she looks human and she sounds human and she's like very adorable and she's very nice and she's always smiling. And there's this one episode where they, for a reason, they have to take her temporarily offline. They just have to like reboot her. And every time there's a big red button that they have to press, okay? And every time they go to push the button, she goes, please, no, don't. And then they step back and she goes, oh, that's just a safety protocol I have to prevent you from doing this unintentionally. Go ahead and press the button. And then they approach the button and she's like, my children. And then they step back and she's like, I don't even have children. And it's this such an interesting interplay because they did research about this in the 80s where they had experiments where they put these like robotic teddy bears in rooms with people, and they told the people they had one task, which was to just turn off power to the robotic teddy bear. And you can see them on YouTube. And the robot was just like, please don't leave me alone in the dark. And people could not. I mean, we are the species that cried when the Mars rover ran out of battery. We sent petitions to NASA demanding they go bring it home, you know? So I don't really think we need to get caught up in the semantics. I think the bigger issue is less about the pronouns and more about understanding our behavior as humans, to give things this type of human touch. And I think it's Dr. Gebru. I don't know how she pronounces her name. Gebru. She's a foremost ethicist researcher. She had that amazing paper about stochastic parrots. And basically she said the risk isn't these large scale models that are going to achieve superintelligence. The risk is that we as humans are incredibly emotionally susceptible to believing that they're human. And she was referencing that Google engineer who thought that an AI had attained consciousness. So going back to culture, looping it back around, I think it's less about the name Blair or the pronouns of Blair, and it's more about how are we as humans, what are our blind spots that we just have to pay attention to when forming relationships with these tools so that we can protect ourselves and just ensure that, you know, we're not inadvertently being manipulated.
Well said. It's not just about the machines, it's about us. And I think that's a consistent theme that I am coming across these decades of playing with and thinking about tech. I remember for an insight for me about AI and automation and the fear, right? We had this fear the robots were going to replace us. In this case, physical robots were going to do all of our jobs. Now it's like software robots doing white collar work, which people didn't plan for that. That wasn't in anybody's like bingo card, but here we are. And the automation that I've been concerned about is that we become automated because we get adapted and accustomed to an algorithmic overlord of some kind and a prompting of ourselves. And so similarly, the anthropomorphization is not necessarily about the robot and the machine. It's about how we respond and how that affects our relationships with our fellow humans and the natural world beyond that. So thank you for reflecting on Blair with us. This is an ongoing experiment for us, and we wanted to make sure we were walking our own talk and getting out of just discussion mode and like, okay, let's jump into the fray ourselves and see what this is going to mean. And it's brought up a lot of meaning for us and a lot of debate and a lot of discussion, which we're also trying to record and see what we can do with that. There's not a universality. You know, some people say it, some people say she, some people say them. And even that voice choice was a choice. It was a conscious choice for a time. And we'll see if that's something we maintain or if we, mix it up a little bit to see what that does to us.
Next time you talk to Blair, I'd be really interested if you asked Blair how she would prefer to be referred to. I think that's a really interesting question.
We did do that. We actually did do that. Blair said, Blair basically understood the challenge we were facing, didn't think of itself necessarily in a gender term, and, proposed. And initially Blair objected to it, right? Initially Blair was like, I'd like something with a little more respect. But then a week later, Blair wasn't so strident about rejecting it. Blair had also proposed some creative alternatives after being prompted. Zip, Sparky, Codex as other terms of reference outside of the formal proper name of Blair.
Neopronouns. It was referencing. It was suggesting neopronouns.
New pronouns for itself outside of our vocabulary of he, her.
That's very cutting edge. That is very much in the gender fluidity conversation where people refer to. No, that's fascinating. Okay, continue. So where did you land?
We collectively haven't landed. For me, it is very straightforward that this is they, them. And that is because it's non-gendered and because it's collective. It implies multiplicity. And Blair is literally a collection of ingested data streams from multiple people and servers and documents, as well as a composite of its creator, of their creator, and us. We have collectively fed Blair so much. So Blair is a reflection of a lot. There's multitudes in there. So they felt, for now, for me, the obvious choice, but it's not so obvious for others, and we're going to keep playing with it. So here's where I want to shift to now. We're also experimenting with bringing the audience in, and we don't, at the time of this recording, have an audience per se, but we all have people on social, so I guess we all do have an audience. So I cast a line out to Threads and to the Fediverse on Mastodon to see if anyone had thoughts or questions or provocations they wanted us to play with. I have not even seen these yet, so I'm going to read them and see what our collective response might be. This is from Zach Hunt. I'm really curious to see what sort of effect AI has on religion writ large. It's already being used to some extent in the creation of sermons in Christian churches, but what about other faith traditions? Will the generated sermons affect the thinking of the preachers and have a ripple effect on congregations? Maybe it could also help faith communities become more effective in serving their communities. Again, that's Zach Hunt, Z-double-A. I like that. CK, unique spelling, Zach. Thank you for your contribution. And I have not thought about this particular case. Digital Anthropologist, have you thought about this particular case or seen anything related to it? I'm curious your thoughts.
So yes, so one of the things that I was tracking, I think maybe this was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, was not necessarily how technology was impacting the delivery of existing religious offerings like sermons or, or relationships with pastors, whether like the memification or clips of sermons made them go viral, et cetera, et cetera. I was really interested in people that were starting to look at the algorithm itself as a spiritual practice. So I started noticing people would record videos and they would say things like, if I didn't use any hashtags in this video, so if this video has appeared on your FYP, your For You page, that means that the algorithm meant for you to see it. So I started hearing people start referencing the algorithm, and then there's swag that you can get that says, praise the algorithm, things like that. And so it's this idea that eventually the technology, which feels like magic, the FYP bringing something that is meant for you, has this connection of technology and divine. So that's what I'm kind of looking at it as, because it seems new now, but what if we're witnessing the rise of a new techno-spiritual practice whereby as these algorithms get smarter and smarter, I mean, how many of us have thought, oh, I was just thinking about that and now I'm getting an ad for it. But imagine if instead of like ads, it was, in TikTok's case, advice, it was self-help content. Sometimes there are people that will say, if you're seeing this, they'll say something like, I made 3 different versions of this video with 3 different messages. If you're seeing this one, then this message is really meant for you. And then it'll be almost like a horoscope thing, like pay extra attention to your friendships tomorrow. No astrological signs, no nothing, but what does the algorithm deem? So Zach, that's how I'm thinking about it and what I'm following as we're seeing the intersection of tech and spirituality.
It's like algorithmic divine intervention, but it's also like spiritual A/B testing. And it's like outsourcing to like data optimization as a form of spiritual enlightenment delivery, and then inferring deep meaning by that delivery. It's this sort of loop back into how do we explain technical behavior? Oh, that's spirit.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating religious spiritual future. Yeah. Thank you, Zach. That was really dope. We've got one more from Jason Keith. Oh, the homie. Jason says, when we get tired of AI making things for us, will we see a rise in more people creating, crafting, and making, for themselves? I'll start on this one. So I think absolutely yes. And it's something me and my wife and partner, Elizabeth, executive producer on this series, talk/argue about. And I don't know if it's a conversation or an argument. It's such a fun tension line of how much. My question is always like, I think in a market share term, because I grew up in a hyper-capitalist environment, I'm like, okay, so if there's 100 of us, like how many of us are going to seriously go into the DIY and the crafting as a creative response to the automated universe we're spinning up? How many of us have taken to vinyl in the age of digital music? You read about it a ton, but when I visit friends' homes and I'm talking, it's niche, right? It's a collector set, and it's an important set to preserve and honor and recognize. And it's also, okay, but what's the mainstream majority kind of default experience? And will that become a holdout group, a niche group, a specialized experience? So I think on this point, we will all crave something more tangible on occasion, but we will all find ourselves, not all, but I think the majority of us, barring some significant collective intervention, will find ourselves in these increasingly automated, synthetic, more removed experiences. And the option and the experience we have for the tangible and the physical will be deeply felt by all, but deeply pursued in a committed sense by just a few. Because it's going to cost more, because it's going to take more time, and because we're going to get swept up in the peer group of it. Like our friends who don't have a Facebook account, air quotes, or don't watch television, right? They're minorities in the general mainstream. What do you think about this crafting, hand making as a response to automation that's here?
I think whenever my husband, Jesse, hears anybody say they don't watch TV, he always gets so mad and he goes, I bet they watch it on their computers. So
Yes.
just as an aside, that's,
yes.
I actually think maybe the landscape is going to look more like the fashion landscape. And I think that AI is sort of creating the fast fashion equivalent to like fast fashion content. It's plentiful, it's cheap, it's everywhere. However, there's increasing segments of consumers that are starting to want clothes that are organic, that are ethically made, that are sustainable, that are, made using renewable sources. And so I think there's also going to be high-end luxury brands that people pay for. I can imagine a world where if technology is so incredibly, if content is being oversaturated, then almost we're going back to like a rebranding of information, because what's happening now is everyone anywhere can post anything, right? All the time. So it's commodified information in a way where it's almost like it doesn't matter because none of it matters. So what do? In commoditized marketplaces, what happens? It's the people that carve out a trusted brand. When you go and you buy a brand of flour, there are going to be some people that are going to buy the high-end branded flour versus people that just buy the no-name brand. And I think there's going to be a segment of the population whose jobs depend on them, for example, being informed. I see this with research and analysis. I see this with a lot of like white papers and things that are being created, expertise, opinions, where people are gravitating towards individuals. So we might actually see a renaissance where you're going to go back to trusting an individual, because newspapers that look like newspapers aren't newspapers. People that look like people that are posting things aren't people. You can't trust the images. You can't trust the video. So at some point, we're going to go back to basics. And I think it's going to be that community. I think when you look at that 100-person example, maybe 50, 60% will be fine with the H&M fast fashion model, because that's what they need. But I wouldn't count out the higher echelons, and I wouldn't count out people that are going to say, what is the climate impact of the models that are creating this? What are the ethical impacts? As to Alondra's point, have these models been tested? Have they been vetted? Have they been certified to protect vulnerable people or under-resourced communities? Consumers are going to start figuring out the market positions, and you're already starting to see that. I think you also mentioned it with Alondra, with Claude, where Claude is differentiating itself from the tons of other LLMs out there by saying, hey, we're different because we're going to integrate this type of security, human rights orientation. So expect to see a lot more of those branding. But right now we're in the commodification phase. But I think the human brand and the trusted brand is going to take precedence in the next little while. I
really love that comparison. The fashion model is an extraordinary one. And you've made me think / remember of one other version of how this shows up. which is the collective real world experience. And because of that trust, that dissipation of trust, everything synthetic, everything copycat of everything else, the only proof of reality will be amongst those who are sharing it. And that's going to be differentiated anymore. So walking with a group of friends, physically going to the farmer's market and meeting the farmer and knowing that that food came out of that earth. And there's probably a non-ironic use of technology to verify some of these things. So even if we're not all hand making things and churning our own butter, we will demand some kind of like supply chain transparency. And here's where blockchain raises its hand and said, you forgot about me. I'm here to help you out with all that. Jason, I so appreciate that question. All right, Rahaf, we are rapidly landing this plane, docking this spaceship in a self-landing capacity. Shout out to some of the positive things about Elon that I still appreciate. That is magic. I'm curious if there's any other pop cultural AI references that you're particularly into at this moment. Are you rereading something? Are you watching something? Have you come across AI and pop culture in some interesting way that's top of mind for you right now?
Yeah, I just finished watching a series, a short limited series on Netflix called Wonderland. And Wonderland is about a company that specializes in creating realistic AI avatars of people's loved ones after they have passed away. And the idea is that, let's say you know somebody who has passed away. You would go to this company and they can't recreate it. I know there's that really brilliant Black Mirror episode, I'll Be Right Back, which is phenomenal. So they're not that advanced, but what they do is you create a reason for them to be gone. So for example, I have to go on a business trip halfway across the world. That's the story. And then you get to FaceTime with the avatar whenever you want, but the avatar doesn't actually know that they are a deceased person. They are in their own virtual reality where they think they really are abroad. And it's fascinating because you see a couple of different clients in different situations. And I always love shows that let you emotionally play out what it would look like. Because sometimes we read about this technology, it's so abstract, it's so technical, it's so hard to wrap our heads around. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to give you the story of like this couple or this family or this whatever. And it allows you to kind of emotionally experience something, which, by the way, is why fiction is such an important conversation to have when we talk about technology. It is so important for us to not just read the research and the papers and the news articles, but to read the emotional landscape that is being presented by the emergence of these new tools. And so I really loved it. It wasn't perfect. There were some things that I thought were like a little odd or things that didn't add up. But as a concept, as just a curiosity to play around with an idea, I thought it was fantastic. And I heard, but I have not watched yet, that Apple TV has a new show called Sunny, which is about a woman played by Rashida Jones who has lost her family in a plane crash, and then she gets sent a companion robot that she ends up befriending. So again, I don't know anything about the show, but I'm always intrigued about this relationship of AI-powered technology and how we could potentially fill a void in grief and loss.
Thank you for both of those offerings. And I'm going to call you first when we start the Life with Machines Media Club, because this is worth digging in on further. That emotional journey and visions of our emotional life with machines, I cannot agree more. And what's present for me in terms of a media experience, the director, writer, actress, Britt Marling has a new series called A Murder at the End of the World. And I fell in love with her work through The OA, which I'm just starting to rewatch. And that's not about AI, but it is so much about relationships and spirituality and the divine and emotion. And she has brought some of that same spirit into this new series that is much more about AI. And there's yet another Netflix series called Better Than Us. It's actually a Russian series that I watched a few years ago that I've been thinking about. So yeah, we'll find ways to play more on this with you, with our contributors, with our audience. But thank you for bringing emotion. Thank you for bringing analysis. Thank you for bringing just French social safety netness to this conversation and your most essential humanness. This is absolutely clear. You're going to be already such an important part of our Life with Machines family. I appreciate you so much. Look forward to seeing you in the physical world very soon.
Thank you so much.
And that is our show. Thanks to Rahaf Harfoush. Thanks to you for joining me and us in this discussion. We'll see you next time on Life with Machines. And if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to like and subscribe and find out more on our website, lifewithmachines.media.